Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really happy to introduce you to Abby Wills. Abby is the program director and the co-founder of Shanti Generation, and she's also has a book called Yoga Skills for Youth Peacemakers. And she is a mother as well of two young boys, so she has personal experience working with preschoolers as well as professional experience. And today she's going to talk to us about reflecting joy and peace and being a source of mindfulness for young children. So welcome, Abby, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this and bringing this community together. It's really inspiring to be a part of it and to share and hopefully meet some new people along the way.
Yeah, great. Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about Shanti Generation and Abby, just click on the speaker link below. There's all of her website and social media information and a link to the book. And there's also a learning resource button where you can get a free one-year license. And I think Abby will tell us a little bit more about what that free license gives you, but it's a one-year license worth $79 on the learning resource button. So thank you so much for doing that. That's going to be very exciting for all the parents and teachers and educators watching. So Abby, tell us a little bit about how you kind of got into teaching mindfulness in preschool and how you learned to do that.
Yeah, well, I've been teaching young people since I was a young person. I really started to teach dance and theater and performing arts when I was 15 years old to young people. And so it's always been a passion. And then in my early adulthood, when I started to teach yoga and mindfulness to adults, I had an adult student who asked me if I will teach yoga and mindfulness at her son's preschool. And I said, sure, I've never done this before, but as long as there's support from, the director and the staff, I'm sure I can figure it out. So I really started, kind of just from this inspiration of a parent. And luckily, very fortunately, the director of the school had a heart for the work. And so together, she taught me, she trained me in teaching preschoolers. And so it was really born of the experience, so to speak. I didn't have a lot of training and teaching young people. It's just something I'd already done, I'd always done, and had a strong practice myself and loved teaching. So it really happened organically. And I say that hopefully to inspire others that, you don't necessarily need to have tons of certifications and a background in child development. All those things are really helpful. And I have those things now. But when I got started, it was really just from a strong desire to learn and to be of service.
Yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful story. I think it's so great that this preschool wanted to bring that in first of all. And I love what you said because I started my teaching career exactly the same way, just going for it and getting my qualifications along the way. So not the normal route, but yeah. So I think that's really good advice for people. So tell us what you've learned. What are some of the most important kind of factors of integrating mindfulness into a preschool?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this question because I think it's, on people's minds, what does it really take? And of course, the foundation of the success, I think, is in the teacher's own practice and our commitment to our practice. Without that, I think there is no ground to stand on. So that's the first piece. And a love for the work. I've working in preschools over the past couple of decades, I've seen many teachers come and go, whether it's mindfulness teachers, yoga teachers, or, classroom pre-K teachers. And I appreciate that, because you don't know until you're in the room doing the work if it's really for you. And there are many people who think it would be really great, and then you get in and realize there are lots of challenges. And some people are just equipped to meet those challenges and enjoy that process, and others find that it's not for them. And so I think, you have to find a fit for you, the school that fits, and know that have a deep love for the work. Without that deep love, it can be overwhelming. But that said, I think there are some kind of there's a framework that I found that really works with preschools, and it really hinges on the directors and teachers involved and the parents supporting the work. So going into preschools where you have that support, that administrative support and the support of the other teachers, feels very, very different than going into an environment where, let's say, a couple of parents want it, but the teachers really aren't supporting it, and they're in the room and there's apprehension. So I think success really depends on the teacher's willingness, the other teachers in the room, willingness to engage. And so that can be a process. Not everybody has to be, quote unquote, bought in from the beginning, but that there's an openness from the other adults in the room. I think that's really important. And that there's a commitment to engaging the practices over the long term. So oftentimes, schools might want to try the practices. Can you come in and teach for an hour, and, let's just see if we like it. And so I can come for 1 hour, but you're not going to really see the potential in one session. So I always try to get, to encourage new schools to try this in a series. At least 4 to 6 minimum series of classes, so that you can see that this is a process, that this practice it's not like teaching 1 + 1. There are many, many different outcomes and many possibilities along the way. And so I really look for that commitment to a longer term implementation, as well as the commitment of an ongoing commitment of an experienced teacher. So, sometimes preschools want us to come in and do professional development with their teachers, which is great, and I'm all for it, so that their teachers can then teach them mindfulness. But without having sort of a mentor teacher, an ongoing experienced teacher, oftentimes schools find that it doesn't work. And so I encourage schools to absolutely develop internal capacity, and also to have that experienced teacher on board for the long haul. A couple of really, really, logistical kind of nuts and bolts things that I found is having flexibility with timing. So one of the schools where I taught for many years, we had an hour sort of booked out for the mindfulness and yoga. And sometimes we would use a half hour of it. Sometimes we would use 45 minutes. Sometimes we'd go the full hour. So we were allowed to flow with what was really happening, which is nice in mindfulness. I prefer to have more time. I find that the 15 minutes is just not enough, because I find that for me as a teacher, it's so much about building relationships, and it's hard to actually hear from everyone in the room if you only have 10 or 15 minutes. So I like that flexibility of time, and also including movement in the program. And I know this is something that some mindfulness programs include movement and some don't. I've tried both. I've always included movement in everything that I do. Several years ago, I took some trainings online that did not include movement, and I decided to try it. And I have to say, I find that especially for young people, doing some movement really helps them to ground in their bodies, to focus, and to enter the mindfulness work in a very different way.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you said also about, encouraging the schools to not just do the one session. I think, sometimes it gets, it's in the news so much. People think it's a magic pill or something, that one session and you're everything's going to be fine. So I love that it's a process, isn't it? And I think that's really important, to give it time to see what happens. So going back to the movement, tell us a little bit about, what the research and the background of including movement. I know for young children, the movement would be very, very important, but what have you found when creating your programs?
Yeah, well, just from a kind of common sense level, when you have a group of 20 or more 3 to 5 year olds, let's say, asking them to sit and be still can be very, very challenging. And I've heard I really try and stay in touch with lots of new teachers. I love mentoring new teachers. And what I hear from new teachers is this idea of, how do I get the kids to be still so that we can do the mindfulness? And I empathize with that perspective. I understand what the question is, and that there's this desire to want to bring young people through an experience of mindfulness. It's very quiet and very introspective. However, the reality is young people typically have so much energy and curiosity. And I think to harness that and to allow mindfulness to spring forth from where students already are, which is wiggly and swirly, and is great, and it really works. And so we also know that through brain research that students who are dealing with trauma and anxiety in their lives, that just to sit still can be an anxiety-causing experience in itself. And so what I found is, it's not, I have a background in yoga and dance and movement, and so I pull from my background. However, simple movements like, just tapping on their legs, tapping on their head, tapping on their hearts, rocking, even just sitting and rocking side to side, or rocking forward and back, or making circles with their torso. This helps to sort of ease the brain into the work, right? So this whole idea of bottom-up approach, instead of starting with this, highly cognitive or introspective experience, and we can just start with the body, and we can let the body know that we're safe first, then we can ease into a more reflective experience, So I think there's a lot of research. There's such a huge body of research supporting movement for learning, and learning mindfulness is no different, right?
Yeah, I love that, and I think we have to really keep in mind the nature of young children, and that is true. They want to move about, most of them anyway. So I love that what you said. So you showed us a few little movements. Are there any other simple movements that you could show us that the teachers watching or the parents watching could use with their kids?
Yeah. So one activity, I love to think of the movements in sort of bundled into activities that have stories and imagery involved. For one thing, it's easier to remember for the adults if you can kind of chunk these movements into activities, but also it helps for students to be able to bring these movements out into their lives. So one thing I love doing is making lemonade with young people. So we imagine we have lemons, and you can really use this imagery of, even like picking lemons from a tree, or picking oranges. You can let them decide, let's make juice. And imagining the colors that are involved, like bright yellows or bright oranges or pink grapefruits, whatever they're interested in, right? Or if there's a citrus tree outside the room, even better. You can just call in from their environment is helpful, because it helps them to familiarize with the activities. It helps to bring familiarity to the activities, which is in essence, what mindfulness is about is getting familiar, right? Getting familiar with our experience. And then imagine that we, cut the fruit in half and then we squeeze with our hands and stretch. So squeezing lemons, squeezing out the juice, and then stretching. And you can even do that with your feet. So right now you could squeeze your toes and then spread your toes. And sitting on the floor, you could do both, squeezing the hands, squeezing the feet, and then stretching all the digits at once. And just doing one at a time, switching. And you can anytime you can bring in a rhythmic chant. This is really calming for young children's nervous system. So it could be like switch and switch and switch, 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 or switch, 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 switch. And then they'll go into on and off, like blinking like lights. We can do the same with our face. So imagine that you lick the lemon and then it's really tart, and then stretch. So how you might feel after you take a sip of the lemonade, like So then squeezing, and then and this just really helps them to come into their bodies. I mean, we talk so much about the mind, right? But the mind truly is in the body. It's a part of the body, right? It doesn't exist only in the body, but if we're talking about connection of mind and body, we want to remember to include the body. There's so many. One I really love to do is just rubbing the hands. Nice. So the hands slow and soft, like 2 rose petals, and then fast if you're trying to make a fire, and getting them really warm, and then placing the hands on different parts of the body. So you could place your hands really soft, cupping the ears, and then pausing to listen. So if anybody wants to try that, you just place your hands real soft like cups on your ears, and then just pause and listen. And then ask them what they hear. And oftentimes they'll say things like the ocean, or it sounds like listening to a shell, or they hear the silence, and then do it again. And so, doing this 5 or 6 times, you can make it a game. They can have fun. And then eventually over those few minutes, you've got these built-in moments of silence and listening, right? And then also rubbing and placing the hands over the heart, pausing to feel the heartbeat. This is something I really love doing with young children, to just feel their own heartbeat and to breathe with their heartbeat. I love doing breathing exercises with young people, like humming and hissing and buzzing breath. Should we try that?
Yes.
So just breathe in really deeply, and then hum as you breathe out. So you can even touch your chest and feel that vibration in your chest. Same thing, breathing in and then buzzing. If you have a really active group, you can imagine your nose is a bee, and as you buzz, you allow your nose to fly around. So it's then you can make a figure 8 with your nose, and then land in one place all together. Za. And so in a sense, the movement is really just inviting them to bring their energy into the circle, to be who they are. And then from there, all of the breathing, the humming, the buzzing, it helps to calm the nervous system. So then we can pause and be more still and quiet.
Oh, wow. I love that. Those are such great examples, and I'm non-captivated, so I'm sure the class of young kids will be, as you said, it's hard to sometimes get their attention, and people go straight into the meditation or silence, and so I love all those are such playful, fun things, and such visualizations, and I have an orange tree right outside our apartment, so that would work well in Portugal, and obviously in California where you are as well. So tell us, give us some advice, Abby, for parents and teachers on that are trying to develop mindfulness in children. Do you have any little points or tips that you could share with them that have worked well for you?
Yes. And, I want to, again, thank you for doing what you're doing, because it allowed me to take a step back and just reflect on what I might want to bring to this summit, knowing that there's, a lot of my colleagues who have a base in research and mental health, and I will let them speak to the neuroscience because they're so good at it. And I think really, my kind of angle on this whole thing, and where I find my ground, is in this idea of being the source of mindfulness and peace for young people. And it's really about beingness. So I find with a lot of new teachers, especially newer teachers who are just finding their way, that there's a real focus on the practices, right? And I think that focusing on our own practice is incredibly important. But oftentimes what I see is that the practices or the curriculum sort of can sometimes stand as a veil between the teacher and the students. We're thinking about our plan, right? And I'm not saying throw the plan out the window. The plan is incredibly important, and knowing where we're going and why we're doing this is incredibly important. However, the plan will often go off the tracks with young children because they have so much to say, and their curiosity is always there in the room. And if we allow that to lead the way, the lessons and experiences can be really alive and juicy and powerful. And to get to that point where we are able to allow the children's own interests and what's relevant to them to guide the way, we have to really trust ourselves. And I've really found that the more I can just go in and commit to being that source of mindfulness, that I am in it's a sort of a different practice that I'm doing, right? As the teacher, it is a practice in itself. And when I'm in that space, it is an effortless experience. When I'm trying to get them to do something, it's a very effortless experience. And so I think that some people naturally can step into that place of entering a relationship with a child, whether it's as a parent or a teacher, a mentor, a guide of some sort, and allowing the relationship and our own practices to guide the way. And for some teachers, that is something that requires a lot of practice. And so, one thing I love to do, and I do this all the time, every time before I teach, and even before sitting and, connecting with you, is just sitting for a moment, even if it's in my car or on the walk up to the school or on the walk into my child's room, just remembering why I'm doing this, connecting into the purpose, what my own motivation, and how that motivation is linked up with so many others who are on this planet right now doing this work, that I'm not alone doing this, and that it's not my responsibility to somehow enlighten every child, that we're all working together. And when I connect into that kind of grid of goodness, I feel supported. And when I feel supported, I can go in and trust the experience and just be that source. And by being that source, maybe we don't get through every activity. Oftentimes we get through more than I even imagined. But the point is that children learn from us, from who we are, right? And that's something we talk about and we say a lot. And, theoretically we understand through, this whole idea of mirror neurons, and just basically observing how children take on the mannerisms and qualities of the adults in their lives. We talk about that, but to really and truly experience that and commit to that is an extraordinary experience. And I just really encourage everyone to realize that, or to not realize, but to kind of play with the idea of, maybe my children and I don't practice mindfulness, quote unquote, together every single day at the same time in the same place in the same way. But can I commit as a parent and a caregiver to being mindful in myself and in the experience, and see what happens and see what transforms? I do see many teachers and many parents encountering a lot of stress and anxiety around wanting to create these mindful experiences for their children. I think that's where the work is is when we feel that sense of lack or deficit in our abilities, is to just work with that and be kind to that. And in being compassionate to ourselves, we are modeling for the young people in our world what mindfulness is and what it can be. And I think they learn more from our modeling and our mirroring than they do from our words, if that makes sense. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful what you said. And I think it's so true. If we embody mindfulness, it just kind of infiltrates into our homes and our schools and our lives, because that's how we are. And I also love what you said about feeling that support, because like doing this summit and speaking to all these amazing people who are all doing such different things, and we have book authors and people like you that are working directly with kids, sharing these amazing practices, and researchers, and I think it's such a supportive community, and as you said, everyone's kind of working together to try and build this mindful, letting people be mindful, and not only focusing on bringing in the lesson for the day and doing those kind of things. I think we all have something to offer, and working together, we can do it. I think there's so many people doing great things out there, so it is really exciting. So Abby, tell us like some of the teachers watching, especially maybe people that are going in to support a class, maybe not their own class, and then they might have some kids who are a bit disruptive or don't want to participate. Do you have any tips on how they can manage that situation when there's maybe one or two children who are kind of laughing or doing, well, laughing's good, but I mean, but that aren't, are maybe just being a bit disruptive of what's happening in the class.
Yeah, that's a really common, and you can almost expect that that's going to happen, at least in the beginning. There are really funny aspects of mindfulness, and I think also children will sometimes laugh just because they're uncomfortable in the experience first. And so I think giving lots of space to build context and to develop meaning of what it is we're doing is important. So we're not just launching into these practices. I mean, imagine as an adult, if you had never experience meditation and someone comes to your workplace and all of a sudden they're ringing a bell and it's like, what are we doing? It would feel very awkward. So I think to just empathize with how new some of this can be for some students. And so giving that space to explain, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, and helping them find value. I often will ask students, how many of you know someone in your life that feels stress? And they all raise their hand. Yeah. How many of you feel stress sometimes? And how do you know that you feel stress? Mm-hmm. Well, and then they'll name those feelings. Well, I feel this certain sensation in my body, or my head hurts, or, they'll use imagery. And then we talk about joy. How many of you feel joy in your life, or you feel so happy sometimes? And how do you know that? And so just helping them to sort of connect into the work by reflecting where they already are practicing or being mindful, or where that mindfulness is already turned on, or helping them to connect those dots so that they can find their own way in. And as an introductory sort of experience, introductions are really important for young kids, and how you initially approach the practices are really important. And the more you can engage them and hear their own words, the better. And also letting them know, and this is a space that I hold. Not every teacher holds this, and this is something you have to work out with also the other teachers in the room. I always allow my students to say no thank you to any experience. No, thank you. That does not mean that you can run around or impose on someone else's experience, but you may sit quietly and observe. And in some situations, there can be an alternative activity. I say enter that very thoughtfully. If you give an alternative activity that's very enticing, like coloring, as the whole class might want to go do that. It's really wonderful when you can work together with the other adults in the room, in whether it's your partner or a co-teacher. If you have students who are continuously disruptive, that you have a plan, right? So that the whole class doesn't just continue to revolve around disruption. So there's, if it's a very intense kind of disruption, there may need to be some other plan where the child is given another opportunity until when and if they're ready to come and be a part of it. But that said, I think typically if we look at a behavior that is disruptive and become curious about it and think about, what might this child need right now that they're not getting. And sometimes it can be really as simple as asking, is there something you need? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Do you need water? Do you need to move to a different space in the room? And letting them know that you're there to help them get their needs met. That you're not waiting for them to change so that you can do what you need to do, but that this is the work. The work is helping them to discover what it is they need. And if this is just too much for them, and it is too much for some students at different points in their lives, then I'm a big advocate for that plan, right? Having a plan for what to do when a child just really isn't ready for this work. And also looking at the practices that we are presenting and sort of reaffirming that they are developmentally appropriate and culturally relevant to the child. So, we may have sort of a repertoire of practices that tend to work for 3 to 5 year olds or younger. And then suddenly you get a group where they're not working. And so looking at why, are these students, a little bit more mature than some of the students I'm working with or otherwise, and how can I modify? So I feel like, overall, when I meet resistance, I welcome it and use it as the ground for the exploration. What's going on right now? I see we're all listening and accurately mirroring, instead of saying, I see you're not paying attention to me, or I see you're not ready for this today, but see, I see the behavior and I name it. We're all we're all moving around. I see a lot of shaking. Do we all need to shake a little bit? And having that relationship so that you come to know what it is that these students need to be able to engage in a meaningful way. And in that light, this practice and this experience of sharing mindfulness with students and young people, it's a very fluid process as opposed to the static thing that can only look one way. And I think being open and trusting that through building relationships, we can find our way in, and that students can find their own way into the work is incredibly important. So, and there's no magic, all these techniques, but there's no one magic way. I think it's about being curious, being compassionate, and being open to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I love what you said. So you've worked at Walther School. Is that how you say it? Walther School for 13 years now, right? So can you share kind of maybe some of the moments that stand out to you where you can see that this really had an impact on the students or the teachers or parents or yourself?
Yeah. So the Walther School is in West Hollywood, California, and it's a magical place, as many preschools are. Dr. Gloria Walther is a professor at UCLA, and she specializes in emergent literacy. And she's been a mentor and an advocate for this work for such a long time. I was at this school for 13 years, but I haven't been there for 8 years since I started having children. And so, she was sort of early on, for many decades, she's been supporting this work in her school. And so, one moment that really stands out is that over the years, as the practices became part of the culture of the school, it gets easier to teach because it's just something that it's part of the air that they breathe at this school. But I remember walking in, there was this beautiful gate and a beautiful garden that led up to the school. And I guess when I would enter the gate, the school would hear some sort of indication that someone's coming in. And so the students would, quickly take off their shoes and go get in the circle and sit. And they would do the humming breath that we did, the hum. And I could hear that hum as I'm walking in. And so I share that just to say that over time, it gets easier to share these practices. As students come to value and experience joy from the practice and experience positive outcomes, they want to do it. They're excited to engage. And so for me, just remembering so many hundreds of times entering that space and hearing these students humming, right, in unison and ready, it's such a warm place in my own self. That I go back to. And really, hearing parents talk about how their children are utilizing their practices in their life is very inspiring. When there's a stressful experience or some kind of disharmony or incoherence in the home, that these tiny little ones will teach their whole family practices. And, another moment that stands out that I will share is every year we would go to the beach and we go whale watching or, tide pool walking. And I was invited to come as the yoga teacher and mindfulness teacher to come and do some practices on the beach. And so we would have the morning and the afternoon kids all together. So this is a huge group, over 40 children. And the fact that we were able to all sit together in a circle on the beach with so many enticing things around us was just a testament to how children can really enter into these practices deeply. And to think, if you can just imagine that, 40 children, their parents and their teachers all sitting in a circle together and practicing meditation together at the ocean. It's just one of those moments that I remember and I call forward when there are challenges or if I sort of forget why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's like, wow, this is really, there's so much possibility. Yeah. And being in a space for a long time helps you to see that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I think it's amazing when you hear these, or you see, or take part in these kind of magical experiences, as you said, and those sound really, really wonderful. So, Abby, can you tell us a little bit about the link that you provided for everyone? So, what will happen when we sign up for that link?
Yeah, so Shanti Generation, I co-founded about 10 years ago. And while we teach all age levels from early childhood through adulthood, our products and resources are geared for early adolescence, which there are a lot of tie-ins between early adolescence and early childhood. But so the resource that we're providing is a streaming platform on our website that's specifically for institutes of education, and it's partner yoga for young teens. So I know this will be relevant and useful and desirable for some watchers and not for others. But I encourage everyone just to take a peek at it, because some of what you'll see there, you'll automatically see is are practices you can modify for young people. It's also practices you can do with other adults. Yeah. So it's I think 10 5-minute sequences, all built around social emotional learning through movement and mindfulness.
Okay, wow, that sounds awesome. So I will put the link there below. And so just before we finish today, Abby, can you tell us a little bit about maybe who some of the people that have inspired you or mentored you in the field are?
Yeah, well, so many of them are on in this summit. I will say so many of them are in this summit, and I'm excited for everybody who's engaging to be exposed to so many great hearts and minds. And I'll share two who are not in the summit who I constantly go back to. One is Leah Kalish, who has a company called Move With Me Yoga Adventures, and she's been teaching mindfulness, movement, meditation in preschools for many, many decades. And I just appreciate her so much and the space that she holds for others to grow in their practice as teachers. She's one who invites us to include our challenges as part of our practice and not to separate mindfulness from what we're actually experiencing, but to include them. And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation. And then another mentor who I just am so inspired by consistently is Cinta Green, who has a company called Full Circle Consulting Systems. She's lecturing all over the planet on early childhood, and she's been incorporating mindfulness into her work with early childhood, early caregivers and teachers for a long time in many different ways, but more and more she's becoming more explicit in her offerings of mindfulness with young people. And, I'll just share one phrase that I hear her say a lot is that, child development is human development is child development. And to just enter the work with a vision for for children's whole life, that it is about what's happening now. It is about what has happened, and it's also about what will happen. And that when we see this potential for children to take mindfulness into their lives, that it helps to frame what we're doing in a way that is spacious and generous, as opposed to trying to get an outcome today. So that's really inspiring.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Abby, for sharing all those really fun, practical ideas and all your tips on how people in preschools and at home can bring these kind of practices and this way of being really to themselves and to children. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the summit today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this, and all the best to everyone out there in your practices and in your teaching practices. It's really inspiring to know how many people are joining this movement. So thank you for supporting that.
Thank you.